Good afternoon, it's Jeff Moss, and I'm really honored today to have as my guest on Leadership 101, Major General retired Frank Muth. Frank and I have a history going back to 1989 when we both served together as lieutenants in the 4th of the 3rd ACR at Fort Bliss, Texas. I knew Frank was destined for greatness. There's no doubt in my mind why he was able to achieve what he did. And it's my pleasure today to introduce him to you. General Muth, welcome to the program.
Hey, Jeff, man, it's so good to see you. You know, I've been following you on Facebook for several years now, and we've talked a lot about your son and where he's serving and giving back to his nation. You're right, 1989, I remember this young strapping lieutenant in, and I think I was a first lieutenant promotable at that point.
Yeah.
Very impressed from the get-go, both with your energy and your passion for serving your country and your leadership, and your passion ultimately for being a maintenance officer, which was awesome. But
yeah, that was
Jeff,
Jeff, a life changer, man.
I know, right? But
yeah.
Jeff, by the way, call me Frank, man. I'm retired, and I appreciate the respect. But at this point, I am Mr. Frank Muth. So
that sounds great. Well,
Jeff, thanks for having me.
Let's go back to those days. So, I mean, through the years, you and I have had some interesting conversations on leadership. I think one of the most interesting conversations we had was a few years ago when I was telling you that ROTC cadets were being evaluated more by their GPA than their actual rudimentary leadership skills. And both of us agreed that if in our day they'd been going by GPA, we may not have been able to do what they're asking of now.
So, Jeff, you know, I'm open about this. I don't care. Heck, you can go out and look it up. 2.4 GPA, history major at Norwich University. How I got into flight school, I have no idea. But I took the test, I passed, and then I passed the physical. And then I said, what do I do now? And they said, well, you got to at least put it #1 or they're not even going to look at you. And then I got it. And I was like, four of us got it. Bill Moody, Tim Luby, Ed Hennessy, and myself. And I was like, my biggest concern and stressor at that point was now I got to pass.
Yeah.
To go down there and not get your wings, right? You know, walk the walk of shame.
Well, the consolation prize was generally infantry, as I recall. So if you go to flight school and fail out, so there was a little pressure.
Yeah, and it was, you know, as you remember, you're tested every day, whether it's a check ride or academics, and every day is a check ride essentially because you got a grade. But I'll tell you what, Jeff, you're right. Yeah, my GPA wasn't great. I did go to a private military school. So I like to say, if you go to a private military school, I went to Norwich, there's Citadel, Texas A&M, VMI, North Georgia. You basically pay someone to haze you. So you're really committed. I'll give you this check and then you can beat about my head and body. But I tell you, I learned some great leadership skills there. And as you remember, you know, I actually gave my first leadership class to the 1st Combat Aviation Brigade's company commanders last week in Fort Worth, 35 captains. And I hadn't been out, you know, the general officers, some of you don't know, but you can't engage with the anybody in DOD or Congress for 1 year. If you're a 1 and 2 star, it's 1 year. If you're a 3 or 4 star, it's 2 years. So that year I was in the penalty box. People would ask me to come speak and I can't because you can actually get in trouble. So finally, I got an invitation a couple weeks ago, and I went out there. I commanded that brigade back in 2009 to 11, took them to Iraq in 10 and 11. And so it kind of forced me to sit down and reflect, which I hadn't done, on what is my story and what was my story of learning and leading. And that's what I titled it. And it was a one slider, but it built on itself. And it went by every rank that I attained and it's associated with a story. And you know me, I like to tell a good story and lessons I learned. And I'll tell you what, I had a lot of fun. I spoke for 50 minutes and I had 40 minutes worth of questions.
That's crazy. I think that at the root level, leadership is a combination of not only just being street smart, but being gifted in the way of reading people, understanding people, having a work ethic that's second to none. And we learned in flight school, we were talking the other day about, the difference between medical school, for example, and flight school. And I said, flight school is 9 months to a year of living hell on earth if you do it right, because you're right, you're in academics all morning, then you go to the flight line or vice versa, and you're taking tests in both in both areas, and nobody really cared how tired you were. You were either going to make it or not make it. So military flight school, I think, is a great grounding for people to understand what really hard work is all about. And not to mention the service academies, ROTC, and it's really a learning lab. So when I get to Fort Bliss, you're the 3-5 platoon leader. And I think you and I had the suck jobs when I got into the maintenance side, and you were the 3-5 platoon leader. Tell everybody what the 3-5 platoon leader does.
Okay. And by the way, gang, this was not coordinated, but first rank on this, my story, learning and leading, is about, it's my lieutenant, and it's called Take on the Hard Jobs.
Yeah.
So there, Jeff and I, Jeff was running maintenance, which you got to understand, we had 74 aircraft, and they were quite old. And so they took a lot of maintenance. Okay. That's to include when we went to combat. I finished my scout platoon. So I had a scout platoon in the air cav troop, which was 6 OH-58s. And the second hardest job besides Jeff's is called the 3-5 platoon. And it's, it's class 3. And class
I would argue
5.
it's reversed, but you go ahead.
It's class 3, which is your fuel, class 5 is your bullets. But the challenge was, and then you have 40 odd soldiers with 48 vehicles, Hemet tankers, Hemet cargos, and then I had 5-ton trucks and things like that, and some forklifts. So you basically feed the unit both beans or bullets and gas. Well, what nobody told me about is if you go to combat, which we went to Desert Storm, Jeff and I actually were on the advanced party together. Remember the C-41 27-hour flight, but that's another story.
Yeah.
When you get to combat, you're now in charge of all the water and the food, because you're the only one that has the haulers. Now, I will say this, and I say this with the greatest respect to all those fantastic soldiers, but their MOS was 77 Fox and 55 Bang Bang, or Bravos, what we called them. They were the ammo guys were 55s, the fuelers were 77. I called them my 77 criminals. And I say that in life. I'm picking people up from jail almost every weekend, but that's a whole nother. They were rambunctious, but I'll tell you, when it came to going to combat, they were laser focused, and those guys worked their butts off.
Yeah.
But that was the hardest job. I want to say it was because, that's another story about following on and getting a troop 3 days before the war kicked off.
Yeah.
But I don't think I would have handled that very quick transition from a platoon leader promoted to captain, 12 days later, take an air cav troop to combat, had I not had a year and a half of the platoon or the 3-5 platoon, because I was challenged left and right, both by the leadership in the squadron to be able to deliver all of that fuel, all of the ammo, receive all of our basic load, create bunkers for that, all the water that we were going through, and then running food back and forth. And it was hard, but it was very rewarding. And the fact that this is where I learned that you got to do what your soldiers are doing. Got licensed vehicles. I'd go pump gas. I remember loading rockets up onto a het or a cargo Hemet with the fork. One of the lines burst. I got covered in hydraulic fluid. Of course, they're laughing their butts off because there's the lieutenant covered in red hydraulic fluid.
Yeah.
Anyway, it was a fantastic job, and I learned a lot.
So they, I was in the back of a junk truck down here in Georgia 3 days ago. A bunch of stuff was stuck, and I was trying to show the young man how to get in there and get it going, with a flat shovel. And I got out and I said, this is not something you're going to see a lot of, but it's called tip of the spear, man. So I've got to show you how to do it so you know how to do it. But this is where, a 57-year-old guy didn't have any business jumping up in the back of a truck like this. But so we get over there, and you're right. So here we go on this long flight. I remember landing in Italy and sitting on the tarmac and then bringing the fuel to us. And boy, that was a wake-up call that this is really getting real. Yeah. We land and everything hits the fan, but you're right. So one of the stories about Frank that I think says a lot about him and his character is we sit there and we're doing day-to-day stuff. You brought up garrison. The reason garrison is harder to manage your soldiers in garrison than in the field, because there's so many things they can get into, include getting in trouble and go to jail when you're back at garrison. But when you get them out in the field, they've got nothing to do but their job. So they get really focused really fast. but it also puts the command element in extreme situations, and some people just don't get it done. So 3 days before we're jumping the berm to go into Iraq, the air war has been going on. Frank has to take command of Renegade Troop and change jobs. And then 3 days later, we're over the berm. I mean, what went through your mind when Colonel Webb called you up and said, "Hey, we need to talk"?
Yeah. So Jeff, let me do a little revisionist on the history. So I was promoted on like the 1st of January, I think. Now the air war, I took command, and I'll tell you the story in a second, but took command on the 13th of January.
Okay.
But remember, the air war started the next day. Then we went up,
Right.
sit there for 2 weeks, and I got to crash at Cobra. That was awesome.
Yeah.
Oh, fire too. Some people didn't know about the 10 fire, but then we crossed the berm. So it was about 3 weeks into command. So here's what happened, guys. So unbeknownst to me, there was a troop out there that was struggling, and we kind of heard little rumors back and forth. Their maintenance wasn't going well. Their training wasn't going well. And essentially the warrant officers gave up on this troop commander. And of course, I'll never bring up his name because he was a great guy. He just wasn't happening for him. So here I am, 12-day captain. I get a call at 10 o'clock at night on a TA-312, the old phone.
Yeah.
And it's Colonel Webb. It's never good when you get a call at 10 o'clock from your boss. And I'm like, oh God. So I turned to my platoon sergeant and I said, "Hey, Sergeant First Class Crutchfield, I got to go up to the squadron headquarters." He's like, "I hope we didn't do anything wrong." So I report to Colonel Webb. He goes, "What are you doing tomorrow?" I'm like, "We're running 3 FARPs. I got 4 water trucks out. We got to pick up more rockets in 20. And I run through this long list of stuff because I knew he was going to question me. And he goes, "Yeah, no, Colonel Starr is flying in. You're taking command of Renegade Troop at 9 o'clock.
Yeah.
I'm like,
and that's exactly what happened.
and so, but he did say to this, he goes, "I'm not convinced they're ready for combat. What do you need to get them ready for to determine if they're ready? Because I'm considering leaving you behind." And so in my head, I'm having to answer this question quickly. And I'm like, I hadn't been flying much for a year and a half doing this other job.
Right.
I mean, I think they got me current in the desert, but I just hadn't been flying much. So I turned to Colonel Webb and I said, "I need 3 battle drills. And once I run 3 battle drills, I'll come back and give you an assessment if they're ready for combat." And of course, they were going to be ready for combat because I was going to get ready for combat, even if it was 2 weeks. But that's how it happened, Jeff. But I will tell you, I thought I was going to walk into this, okay, new commander with this positive, upbeat, hey, great, all this. I had a pretty decent reputation in the squadron. No, they were still just as morale in the dirt as they were before. And I fought through that. Literally at one point almost came to, I'll just say, I was ready to take somebody to the woodshed, not to the train station, but to the woodshed. It took me about 4 months when I moved some folks out, or some folks moved out after Desert Storm, and I got some really quality warrant officers in, 2 from Korea and 1 from Germany. It changed the complexity overnight. And he first learned the skill set to, 1, try to create the conditions, but knowing that you've got to harness everybody around you to truly create those conditions. Well, you want to fight to get into your unit instead of fight to leave.
So
unit could be your team, it could be your organization. I see people come to you, Jeff, they want to your company for the very reason that you provide inspirational leadership. You fill tanks up, that inspirational tanks filled up your leadership every day. And I think I'm pretty good at it, but I certainly learned some really tough lessons over the years. But that's what you want to do. You create trust and you create that ability to inspire people to want to be and do their best.
I think it's a gift to be able to get people to crawl up the outside of the building versus take the elevator. And it's just something some people can do and some can't, but you're right. It's inspired leadership, leadership on purpose. Some people call it. But, we all knew when it went down and you were put in that role, everybody knew that you were the right choice. And that happened because of the excellence of everything you had done up until that point. And in fact, I told people way back that if there were anybody amongst us that were going to make it to general officer, you would be the guy. I was right. So here you are now, retired 2-star. But Colonel Webb had a lot of faith and confidence in you to do that. And I agree with you. I wouldn't have been left behind either. I kind of was, because I was bringing up the rear when we jumped to move out to the west. It's totally uncomfortable when you're the last guy out of anywhere and you're wondering if anybody forgot you. and
Right.
you finally catch up. There's so many funny stories that probably would recollect, but I will tell you this. Colonel Webb and I laughed about this about 2 years ago. He said, I'll never forget you walking in the tent and I asked you where the sergeant major was and you told me he was trying to burn water. And I thought you were kidding. And I said, no, sir, I was telling you the truth. He was pouring gas on creek water because he didn't want the enemy to get the water. And of course, the vessel would burst and the water would put the fire out and he'd keep trying. And I finally just gave up, said, I got to go. And we hit the girl.
I remember that. I remember that. I do remember this, and this, if Colonel Webb watches this, we all get it. Now, you never did, I know for a fact, but a lot of us were dippers back then, okay? And we all basically, because guys, look, you got to understand, and to try to get this message out to people, when we crossed the berm, we didn't know. The biggest thing we were worried about were chemicals. And we were, the casualty projections were like 30%. So when you're getting ready for that for 5 months, you got a lot of time to think. Bottom line is this, a lot of us got to the ground, got to the desert, we started smoking cigarettes. I'm not condoning smoking. It's just, we literally, the officer corps was always discouraged from that. So a lot of people dipped, but when we went to war and we were about to possibly die, we were like, I don't care anymore about that. And I'm going to start smoking. Anyway, I think the smoking in the squadron went from like maybe 10% to about 50. But anyway, remember the whole time Colonel Webb he would say, you guys, I quit smoking 10 years ago. And he would give us a hard time. I'll never forget crossing the berm to our first assembly area. He goes, Frank, give me one of those marble lights. And I'm like, sure, sir.
It's, that'll get your attention, when you realize, and remember Saddam was saying it's going to be the mother of all wars. So we didn't know what to expect. No. And I must say, for people that are interested, when we got to that airfield and made the turn left to head toward Baghdad, we were all not only shocked that when the ceasefire got called, but we were upset. And I don't know that your average person can understand why a bunch of soldiers would want to see something stop. And the reality of it was we knew the job wasn't done, but politics, everything comes into play. And sure enough, we're back over there, years and years later, still trying to weed out Saddam Hussein. But let's talk a little bit about post-Desert Storm. You come back and your career takes off. I know it's kind of fun for those listening. My son has now served in a unit that Frank commanded in the 1st of the 17th Cav at Fort Bragg, North Carolina. You have mentored him. It was such an honor for him and for me to connect the two of you as he was a fledgling lieutenant and starting his military career. To have a general officer advising him was really cool for him.
Well, that was my pleasure. And again, I think back to when you reached out and we connected, and heck, he was a cadet back then, right?
Yeah, that's right.
Yeah, he was Georgia Bulldog. Shocker.
That's correct.
So Jeff, the interim years between Desert Storm and OIF 3, Operation Iraqi Freedom 3, I did various jobs. And, like we talked about before, I was never promoted early, but I was given some opportunities. I think it was when my turning point was as a major. I did well in command, don't get me wrong, but I think it was as a major, and I was a major battalion S3 operations officer and a brigade operations officer in the 82nd. I love the 82nd. And after that, I went up to work at PERSCOM where they do all the HR, which was a great experience. Well, my follow-on command was initially slated to go to the 101st in 217, but I was the only one on the list that was a jump master. And they had to have a jump master to command in the 82nd. So I went right back. And I'll tell you, we deployed in 4 months back to Iraq. Worked for a National Guard division. First time a National Guard division had deployed to combat since World War II. Wow. And it was the 4th out of New York, the Rainbow Division. And I will tell you, Major General Toledo, I'm trying to think of my brigade commander, but I will in a minute. I thoroughly enjoyed working for them. They gave us the latitude and the freedom to maneuver, and the guidance was go out and support the soldiers on the ground. Wow. And we had several folks that had already been to Iraq about 6 months before, several of the pilots. And they were in Fallujah, and they came back and I said, okay, guys, how should we fly? And we specifically trained in this manner that they learned early on after getting several aircraft shot down in Fallujah. And it's basically becoming the worst pilot to come out of Fort Rucker ever.
Yeah.
Because you maintain your same airspeed, altitude, or heading. You have to constantly be, what we called it was the KW dance. You've got to be on the move. And I'll tell you, we were the only Cairo Warriors in country. We were initially in Balad. Then we moved out after the elections out to a place called Bob McKenzie, just east of Samara. We had a troop up in Mosul and 2 troops down in Samara. So I was rotating those troops up to Mosul every 90 days because initially that winter, it was very active up in Mosul after the November Fallujah action. We called it toothpaste, squeezed a lot of them up to Mosul. So we were having contact quite a bit, had several aircraft shot down up there. Nobody was injured. One Purple Heart got shot in the chest, but it didn't penetrate his SAPI plate. But then everything started coming down our way in March and May. And we were getting 24 aircraft shot up, had several shot down. 2 guys were killed.
I'm sorry.
Absolutely wonderful. Josh Scott and Matt. And Matt was actually the first guy I met even before I left Northern Virginia to go take command. I met him on a running trail, and he was the senior instructor pilot in Charlie Troop. And I had a Wolf Pack, which was the other sister aircraft unit there in the 82nd. He was already down. He was up visiting his wife, and Matt's like stops. He goes, "Are you from the 82nd?" I go, "Yeah, I'm going down there soon." He goes, "What are you going to do?" I said, "I'm taking command at 117." He's like, "I'm their SIP." So we had crews together. So Matt and I, we flew a dozen plus times. Josh and I flew a couple times. That was very difficult for the squadron. It brought us together. We were a very close unit. That brought us even closer. But I will tell you, the leadership challenge was having something like that happen with the intensity increasing across the board and having 6 months left. And so now everyone's flying. You can't fly. You've got to have some risk out there a little bit. But you can't be too standoffish because you still need to be aggressive. Because actually what's necessary, because everything we were doing was mostly troops in contact. So you have soldiers on the ground. You get a troops call from this 19-year-old soldier. You can hear the fear in their voice and machine gun fire in the background. And they're saying, "We're in contact, we need help." And our guys, nothing would stop us short of like weather to prevent us from going to the sound of the guns and helping those soldiers on the ground. And we did that time and time again.
So Frank, great time to explain to people what the aviation motto "above the best," what that really means, right?
Well, it is, because you're above the infantry and the armor soldiers. And as a matter of fact, at that point, a lot of other branches that or MOSs, specialties that would normally not be doing jobs like that, convoy security things, they had to. So our team was doing that logistics. So a lot of people were out there in the battlefield on a regular basis. And so again, and we were in constant contact, because every time you went to a sector, you would check into the battalion that owned that sector. And we'd say, "Hey, we're a flight of 2 Cairo Warriors. We got 300 rounds of 50. We got 9 rockets. We got 1.2 time on station. And this is Pale Horse 6. And I'll be in there and I'll call exit of your AO. We do recon. And basically we're waiting for a call, unless we're there for another deliberate mission, which we would have planned beforehand. And so we were operating from the big cities were Tikrit, Samara, Bakuba. And then there was a couple other, I'll call this, because it's open, I'll call it a crap hole, but we didn't call it a crap hole.
Yeah.
Really bad places. Samara was one of them. You had to be really deliberate and really careful when you went in there. And you had to come in from different directions every time, because they would, if you got too predictable, that's when you're going to start taking rounds.
We had, so when I got out and I started flying with the Army Aviation Heritage Foundation, went right back into Cobras a few years after coming off active duty, flying for the civilian group. The first air show I went to, they put me in the front seat of a Cobra with a Vietnam veteran named Judd Lewis. And they're doing a Vietnam reenactment, 2 Cobras and an OH-6. They had a Caribou up in the air doing an airdrop, and I'm just there to ride along. When we got done, I was white as a sheet, scared to death. We got on the ground and I walked around the helicopter, and Judd just nonchalantly gets out of the back seat and he goes, "Well, how'd you like that?" And I said, you just showed me some shit, man. And he goes, what do you mean? What do you mean? And I said, we didn't learn how to do any of that. And in fact, we were told in flight school, if we did any of that, the Cobra would come apart and kill us. So we were, pop, shoot, drop. Well, it was interesting that to your point about the tactics, a number of the guys I was flying with in the Heritage Foundation were Apache qualified, Cobra qualified. Some of them were Vietnam. They called them back to Fort Rucker to instruct because we had lost the close air support combat skills. Yeah. And nobody knew how to do it and do it safely. And I tell you what, man, these guys turned me into a real Cobra pilot. And some of the guys from our unit have gone out and done a ride with me and done return to targets and all that kind of stuff, of which I knew nothing about until these veterans taught me. So it's a lesson.
So what helped us, and so like I said, I brought up Matt Laurie, the guy we lost. He again was one of the guys that came back in April and then returned again we left early or late October. But what they learned over there in Fallujah was, one, you couldn't hover fire. You had to be constantly moving. And I'm not talking moving 20, 30 knots. You're coming in over a target at, in the Kiowa Warrior, which is a Bell 407. You're averaging on a run in, you're probably 80 knots. That's about average, right? And we did, basically, you could do 3 types of fire. Running fire, which you're coming in flat. A bump and hit is what we would call it. So you would come about 700 meters from the target, knowing that you're going to close. You pull av cyclic, you nose it over, you shoot 50 cal first, and because the 50 cal has tracer, it would tell you where you're going to hit. And then you cycle over and you shoot 1, maybe 2 rockets, and then you come off. And number 2 should be going in right behind you, right after that, and taking care of the target because they're covering your break. So that was a bump and run. And then the other one was diving fire. But we were flying it anywhere from 50 feet or below.
Yeah.
So not much to dive in. And nobody wants to get up to, back then, 200, 300 feet. Because we had multiple aircraft, mainly Apaches and Blackhawks, I think one Chinook, by SA-16s. And so, the KWs, we lost a couple to SA-16s in Fallujah because they were still doing hovering fire. So that's when all went out. And then to talk about Vietnam, the troop that was up in Mosul, we were working with 2nd of the 101st Apaches, guy named Russ Stinger, dear friend of mine, went to flight school with him. And we created what they were doing in Vietnam, which were paint. So over Mosul, the KW would be low on the buildings and the Apache would be high. So we would go in, usually either stir things up or find them, and then the Apache would come in and take care of them. So, and we ultimately started that, did a white paper on it, and everyone else started to do the same thing across Iraq even after we left. But evolving tactics, that's the other thing. You got to evolve. Every time we would have a significant contact, we would AAR it and go, what did we learn? And are there tactics changing? And do we need to start changing tactics? M4 out the left door initially was like the whole Army, no. It turned out to be, and we put people through the training program, but it turned out to be very, very useful. And we were the first one of the first ones to use it in 04, 05. And it was adopted after that all the way through Afghanistan.
So it's interesting, being in the military where you hear the words adapt and overcome at least 5 times a day, right? And then you say, that's the way we've always done it. And it's such a conundrum for a military officer to have to sit and tell somebody their baby's ugly, and we need to make some changes. But I want to step back because I want to do this again with you. And I don't even want to get into your recruiting command and all of that because I think that's a whole nother great call. So I do want to go back though and talk about some of the fundamentals of leadership from the early days. So we come out and we're 23, 24-year-old kids now leading people into combat. What do you think some of the most significant things you learned then that are now impacting you some 35 years later that you're pulling on? And
So, and I did this through all 3 of my, so I was very lucky to command at the aircraft troop, aircraft squadron, and brigade level in combat. That's a timing thing. That's not anything to do with my skill set, but it had to do with because I commanded so early in Desert Storm, I was able to get it in. There's I think one other guy that was able to do that, a guy named Lieutenant General Doug Gabriel, aviator too. So, and here's some of the things I learned. One is because I did it in Desert Storm, of course, but it really carried over in OIF and then OIF, OND. You've got to set the example. Yeah, and you can't just like say it. I mean, so I had to get out there. I thought it was important to be at just as much risk as all the other pilots. Now, you don't want to put yourself at total risk. But my point is this: I was flying 3 to 4 times a week during OIF, during my second combat tour. I flew out over 650 combat hours in a year. Now, the average pilot was flying about 70, and I think that's a good balance. But I was flying 3 to 4 times a year or a week, and I got shot at, and I had engagements myself. And my point is, they've got to know that the squadron commander or the SCO was out there doing the same thing, and the F flew, and the XO, everybody had to fly. Now, a lot of that was because we left for combat with only 100%. And if you're starting R&R at the 3-month mark, sending 10% of your people back home for 2 weeks, we were short pilots. And so everybody, and it kind of helped because everybody was involved. There wasn't this person coming back, well, they're not flying, they're just sitting in the air condition. No, it wasn't like that. So bottom line is you've got to be able to, one, be tactically and technically efficient at what your job is. I got, because I had some great warrants, not any skill that Frank Muth had, but when you're flying that much and we did not leave the FOB without shooting.
Mm-hmm.
Let them leave unless they exercised at least the 50 cal. And so you were shooting every day, you were flying every day, and you were feeling really comfortable in that aircraft.
So that's confusing. That may be confusing to some folks. So I want to clarify this a little bit. So in the Army, pilots are predominantly warrant officers. And the old adage is that they're the real pilots and us commissioned guys are wannabes, pretty much. So what's interesting, though, is when you fly at a skill set that you're describing, they respect you more ways than one. They respect you as an aviator and a pilot, and they see you as a colleague, but then they turn around and respect you as a commander. And you've got to earn both of those things. It's not a gift, especially from warrant officers and NCOs. So
a funny story, and he's still flying, but I think he's doing medevac now. Super nice guy, Mitch Fulmer. But Mitch, I'm flying with him. He was right seat. So you guys know the Cairo Warrior, you can only shoot the 50 cal rockets from the right seat. The left seater, you have your M4, but you're really there to run the radios and to navigate. So I'm over and we just take off from the FOB. We just finished and we're heading towards Bakuba. And I'm over in the left seat going, and I'm just dialing. It's like at this point, you've done it so much. I'm bringing the MMS, well, we didn't use that very much, but I'm basically bringing the map up. I'm putting in all the data. I'm punching up the radios. I'm doing stuff that normally at the commission level, you'd be like, well, you'd be methodically going through it. And Mitch looks over and he goes, damn, sir, you're doing that like a warrant.
Yeah.
Compliment I ever got. And
it's true.
Good. Yeah.
I'm gonna make you proud. I call my son Captain Moss. I call him the kid. He's really a good pilot. But if I didn't know that coming from a warrant, and I'll tell you 2 quick things on him. When they switched over from the D model Apaches to the E, Jay was on one of the missions to go pick them up. Jeff Jr., call him Jay. When he comes back, the W3 SIP that flew back with him sent me a personal email afterwards and said, sir, I just want to let you know your son flies like a warrant. I'm so proud of him. And I mean, it's so you're right, it's a compliment, but the best story I can tell you, I went to the Apache simulator at Bragg and there was a W2 running the sim. And they were switching over to a new process of handling emergency procedures. And Jay was in the cockpit and the warrant kind of looked at me and smirked. And he said, I'm about to ask them to fire rockets and I'm going to fail some systems and they're going to get a hang fire basically. So he failed one system and Jay bypassed the system and started going to a secondary to launch. And he's flipping the computer and trying to get get ahead of him. He fails the second system. Jay goes to a third, a tertiary, and he kind of gets on the mic. He goes, just try to fire a damn rocket, okay? And he looked at me and he goes, let me tell you something. For a captain, an 03, to know the systems that well without even going to a checklist and bypass, he said, he's incredible. And I walked out of there, man. I said, oh, that's the kid. Yeah, I love it.
Well, come on, Jeff. One is, I think a big part of leadership is also it's that passion and it's that inspiration. And you were the one to compliment you that started that with Jay, and you kept it going because you're still flying to this day. And
Yeah.
and of course he was going to want to go aviation. I mean, no doubt. So, so we talked about it though. It's like, again, you got to lead from this tip of the spear. And I got a little pushback. I'll just say this from my rear D command saying, we think you're flying too much. And I didn't back off because it was important. I thought it was important on the situation, and they weren't on the ground. And I had to make that decision. The other thing, it gets to that technical and tactical. Do they respect your ability? And this is not just Army. This is just leadership. Do you know your team? Do you know your business? And then that's the other thing is you've got to listen to your people. Let me tell you, if they're part of the solution, and you take it all in, and then ultimately the decision is on you. And then you may take this person's idea, may not take this person's, but it doesn't matter. Their voice was still heard. And you have to actively listen, skill set that can be easily lost. I have to work on that. I'm not good at it. But then when the solution is developed and you decide on it, everybody has had a part of that. So now they feel that they're part of the solution and they're on board, And I think compassion, you've got to have an understanding for your people. And then lastly, the big thing I remember learning, and I mean, I've learned a lot in combat, and was the first time we got there in late October, early November. Mosul was going hot all the way through January and February, and then things started picking up down where we were. And you can look this up on the military channel if you wanted to, or you can just Google it now and watch it. But two of our aircraft got a tick call from a group of Iraqi and American soldiers down at Lake Tharthar. So it's called Lake Tharthar. And they went down, I could barely hear it at the end of their shift, and they were low on fuel, and they leave Samara, and they're getting closer, and they're getting more and more data and more and more data. And it turns out that this Iraqi company and American platoon ran into a Syrian training camp. So these are not just your basic insurgents. These are dedicated, well-trained, well-disciplined soldiers. And it out with 6-packs across in black, red bandanas, and they're full up, and they've been training down. And these guys run across, and they tear up this Iraqi company. And matter of fact, one of the medics from the Americans, who ended up getting a Silver Star, but was unfortunately killed 6 months later with an IED, was running amongst the wounded Iraqis and treating them and picking up their AKs and unloading it towards these bad guys. So these guys were basically pinned down. A lot of Iraqis were either killed or wounded. And the Syrians had actually come up out of their trenches and actually went to the Iraqis. And if they weren't already dead, slit their throats and then would run back. So anyway, our guys are closer and closer, and they finally get the full sense of the situation. And the only way that they're going to be able to break contact, the ground forces, is if our guys go in hot. And I will quote the PFC that I used one of his witness statements to get all 4 of them distinguished flying crosses, which says, I don't know what was going on, but suddenly these 2 little birds showed up and started shooting up the place. And that's what they did. They went in and started unloaded 50 cal and rockets into the trenches where all these Syrians were. The lieutenant undoes his armor side panel. He's hanging out with his M4, cracking out rounds, and they do 3 passes. And at that point, they're Winchester, which means ammo.
Yeah.
Both of them had taken no less than 6 rounds through the cockpit. One's leaking fuel. The other one has no radios left. They're both actually leaking fuel. Nobody was hit, luckily. I think somebody had a graze across the helmet. The lieutenant comes in, pulls his armored side panel in, takes a round into the ARB side panel, knocks him into Willie. Willie thinks he's actually hit now. Willie comes back around, lands behind the platoon that has now been able to break contact because of our guys, gets out, because if you're shot, a lot of times you're either in shock or you're adrenaline, especially in that, you're adrenaline. You don't even runs around, makes sure that that the lieutenant was okay. By the way, that lieutenant who got a DFC for that went on to fly in the 160th. He's in command right now, got 2 more DFCs. Wow. He was fine. They pick up and they head back. So here's my point about leadership. I'm in the talk. They're about a 25-minute flight. They landed with like 40 pounds of fuel. which guys, that's just fumes. I mean, that's barely reading, and you're lucky if that's that accurate.
Yeah.
They start to talk to us, at least the one that had the radio, within about 20 minutes out, maybe 15. I action the entire division, the brigade, F-18s, F-16s, ground troops, and Apaches, all towards there. Man, we call it the pale horse pile-on. Because we only carry a little bit of ammo, right? Use everybody else's before you use yours.
You were the appetizer.
So here's where the leadership came in. It came in two ways. When we first started getting the calls, I walk in, I just done PT, I was in my PT gear, I walk in, and Willie comes up on, Will Williamson, retired W3. I hear his voice on the net. And guys, we had already been in combat now 7 months. So we knew each other really well. And I knew something was wrong. He wasn't scared, but he had a very determined voice. And we knew something was going down, and everybody stopped in the talk and they looked at me. I'm the squadron commander. And this is where one of the lessons learned, I called it the mantle of command. And when things go bad, and they always go bad eventually, great unit or a good to great team is how they handle bad things. So they look to me and I'm like, what are you guys looking at me? You know what to do. Let's get on the radios. Let's get division notified. Let's get some grids. Let's get, find out if anybody's injured. Do we need to spin up medevac? I mean, and everyone just boom, but they stopped. They kind of froze for that second. And I remember, so bottom line is if you're a leader, something's going to happen. Be prepared. One, train your team well, but also when that happens, they're going to look to you and they want to see confidence and they want to see leadership. All right. The next thing that happened, and then I'll finish with this. They land and they are shutting down and they're out of that cockpit and the blades are still turning. Fuel's leaking on the ground. And these guys, I see it in their eyes. There is so much adrenaline going on and they're running to another set of aircraft. We called ahead to their own troop and had them starting it up. I go, what are you doing? We're going back out. Now, Will got very upset about this. And he later even said that in the TV show, and you'll see it. He questioned the commander about sending him back. I had everybody and his brother. My gut, which you also learn, if they went out, I wasn't going to see him again. Yeah. Because and now, if I couldn't get all these other people there, we would have gone back. I would have probably sent another team, maybe not, because these guys were fresh or they were ready to go. I would have at risk and assumed that risk. But I just knew that they didn't need to go back out. We did our job. We got those guys off the battlefield and broke contact, and everybody was going back out there to take care of the rest of those guys. And so anyway, these things, you have to be prepared. You have to make decisions, and sometimes they're not popular, but that's what you're there for as a leader.
Well, Stormin' Norman, I got to hear him give a talk years after Desert Storm. And Schwarzkopf said the secret of leadership is to make a decision. He said, you heard me say, I didn't say make the right decision. I didn't say make the wrong decision. I said, make a decision. And once you've made a decision, retrospect will tell you if you made the right one or not, but leaders have to move forward. They've got to do something. And I don't blame you for not sending those guys back out. I've seen those eyes. And yeah, you're more full of adrenaline than good logic at that juncture, and it's not going to lead to anything good potentially.
So here's the last thing I'll tell you about that incident, Jeff. And I know you recognize this because we went through this in our squadron about the awards. I sent the 4 DFC write-ups, and I had witnesses statements from everybody on the ground, and they were saying we would have died had these guys not showed up. Okay, yeah. So they saved our lives. I sent up the write-ups. Division kicked it back and said, give the commissioned officer a DFC and the other 3 warrants are air medals for valor. God. Not. I resubmitted it. And then I submitted it a 3rd time. And then finally, I don't know how, but the Corps commander, Lieutenant General Vines finds out. He's like, get those things to me ASAP so I can sign them, all 4 of them. And so stick to your guns. When you get pushed back, if you feel that it's the right thing to do, don't give up on it. Keep going.
Well, that's the mantle of leadership too. You have to stand up and do what's right for your people, even when it hurts and is painful sometimes, because too many people are trying to take the easy left versus a hard right, and it's a challenge. But so we served together. Like I said, it's just been incredible to watch your career. I definitely want to set up another one of these because I want to get into your experience with recruiting command. I think you completely revamped that. It's my sense. I watched you doing it. on videos, and you had an incredible sergeant major working with you, command sergeant major. It was so apparent. I want to hear about her. I'd love to get her on one of these things at some point to talk about the non-commissioned officer side of it.
You know what we should do? I will tell you, and I'm sure she'd sign up for it. We could do it together.
Yeah.
Because I will tell you what, and I won't go into it now. I would just tell you, she was, and I would say this every time we talk to people. We talk to people all the time. She's the brains of the group, and she would say, absolutely. And but I've had very, very close relationships with all my senior non-commissioned officers at the troop, certainly at the squadron,
yeah,
really at the brigade, and then there. And that was the best. I mean, well, between the brigade and there, it was probably the best. But and it makes the world of difference. It really does.
So with all these interviews that I've done, Frank, there's such a common theme: good decision making, self-awareness, knowing your strengths and weaknesses, surrounding yourself with people smarter than you. All of these things are coming up repeatedly. So for folks that actually take the time to watch these videos, make note of those things. No complacency, no arrogance, just make decisions, make good decisions, make the best decision you can, trust your head, your heart, and your gut, try to get everything aligned. General Muth, thank you so much for coming on board. I'm looking forward to seeing you at our CAV reunion in Nashville.
I've made my hotel reservations.
Me too. We're going to have a good time. And I do want to give you another thing before we sign off. I know you had to write letters home, and you and I both buried a soldier. You buried two, I guess. I buried one. These are things that in the civilian world, you just can't grasp the level of commitment people have when they're willing to die for their country, serving their country, serving their fellow man. We've witnessed it, and these are incredible people. So God bless, rest in peace to these fallen soldiers. And I look forward to having you back on here. Final word, sir?
No, I just say, Jeff, this was an honor. One, it was great catching up with you again. I look forward to seeing you at the reunion and anytime. I'll tell you what, you know, if you could tag me, if you put this on LinkedIn or wherever, can you like make sure I see it? Because what I'll do, I'll share it also.
Absolutely.
I'll put a comment, same thing with on Facebook. I don't do Instagram anymore, but anyway, I'm on Twitter. But anyway, it's been an honor. It's been a pleasure. Please give my very best to everybody in the family, and I'll see you in.
Sounds good. So for Leadership 101, Major General Frank Muth, Jeff Moss, thanks for joining us today, and I hope you walk away with some new information on leadership. Take care.